Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. We'd like to thank NAMI Brazos Valley for sponsoring today's webinar. And our guest presenter today is Maren Eberhard. She's a clinical social worker for Baylor, Scott & White. So thank you for being with us today, and we're looking forward to hearing more about mental health and coping with COVID-19. I know that there's a lot of people out there struggling with all the sudden changes, and even at work, at home, with their kids being home, just all aspects of what we're all going through here. So thank you, Maren, for being with us today, and I'm going to let you take over, and we're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. I am really grateful to be here, and I appreciate this opportunity to share with you. So today I wanted to talk about finding hope in a time of crisis. So I don't know if you can pull up the PowerPoint.
There might be a tad bit of a delay, but it's live now. Your first screen.
Okay. So in a situation like this, I want to begin by finding what I like to call a common language. So the reason why this is so important is because, especially when we're talking about big terms like crisis, mental health, it's important that we're on the same page. And so I love this quote by Dr. Brene Brown, and she says, "We need common language to help us create awareness and understanding." Okay, so mental health. I love this definition of mental health. Its mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence through adulthood. So when we think about this definition, I mean, obviously mental health is a huge aspect of our lives, and yet we struggle to allow ourselves to maybe sometimes talk about our mental health or to acknowledge our mental health. And so it's really important that we recognize how many areas our mental health can affect. Okay, so the next definition is of a crisis, which is a time of intense difficulty, trouble, or danger, a time when a difficult or important decision must be made, the turning point of a disease when an important change takes place, indicating either recovery or death, and a time of great disagreement, confusion, or suffering. So I think based on that definition, it's pretty safe to say that we've been dealing with a crisis in regards to COVID-19. And so for the rest of this presentation, what I want to do is focus on the second part of that definition, which is a time when a difficult or important decision must be made. When we are dealing with emotions, oftentimes it can feel very overwhelming, and it can often feel like things are so beyond our control. The reality is that there's a lot of great tools out there and techniques that can help us take unmanageable emotions and make them manageable. So when we are dealing with feelings that are stressful and overwhelming, one of the things that we need to do is give ourselves permission to feel. And so what does that look like? I'm going to talk about the first tool, and that is mindfulness. So maybe some of you are familiar with the term mindfulness. A lot of times it gets, they talk about it with yoga, and it's about sort of this Zen place, or where you tell yourself, okay, don't think about anything. But the way that I use it is based on the work of Dr. Kristen Neff. And she describes mindfulness as the practice of leaning in to our emotions. And not judging them for how we feel. And so when we allow ourselves to lean into our emotions and not judge them, so for example, if we are struggling with anxiety, oftentimes our first reaction is to say, okay, don't feel anxiety, don't feel anxiety. And it sounds kind of weird to say, well, what can be helpful is to actually lean in and acknowledge it. But it's one of those things that unless we take the opportunities to acknowledge what we're feeling, then we won't be able to change it, because we can't change what we don't acknowledge.
Hey, Maren, I think I'm a little either behind or way ahead on your slide. Could you tell me where you are on the presentation? I was on the vulnerability slide.
Yeah, so I'm on permission to feel. So go back.
Oh, go back. Sorry. There we are. Okay, you were still there. Okay, and then I moved on. I think I moved on a little too quickly to the vulnerability.
Okay. Okay, so when we allow ourselves to practice that mindfulness, I don't know if you all have heard of or seen a Chinese finger trap, but it's a toy in which you put your fingers in, and you try to pull out and the trap tightens around you. That's sort of like when we resist feeling our emotions. Oftentimes we want to just run from them, especially when they're hard and painful. And what happens is we think, okay, well, I'm just going to numb it, avoid it, not think about it, and that will make it go away. But the reality is that all it does is end up trapping us. And when we practice mindfulness, it's about leaning in, like we would in the Chinese finger trap. In order to get released, we would lean our fingers into the middle, which opens up the trap. And so when we practice mindfulness, it's about acknowledging the emotion, what we're feeling. And then the second part of that is not judging it, that it's not right or wrong that we feel that way, but what matters is what we choose to do with that feeling, which goes back to that slide about making a choice. Okay, so that's mindfulness. That's one of the first tools. The second tool is vulnerability. So vulnerability, this definition on this slide is uncertainty, emotional exposure, and risk. And this is based on the work of Dr. Brene Brown. And so vulnerability, when you look at that slide, okay, we think about times in which we've been vulnerable. So there's uncertainty involved, right? We don't know what's going to happen. There's emotional exposure. We've shared something that might be hard or painful. And there's a risk because, again, we don't know what the outcome is going to look like. So why would vulnerability be a tool to help us with our mental health? Because the reality is vulnerability, that's really scary. I mean, it's scary to think that we can put something out there and not have control over it, especially when it's something that is hard or painful or we feel exposed about. But as she's done her research on vulnerability, while it is incredibly hard to do, vulnerability is the birthplace of love and joy and connection. So think about the people that you've given yourself permission to be vulnerable with, in which you have shared something that was hard or difficult emotionally. And that person was there for you. They stepped up, they heard what you had to say, and they listened and they saw you and acknowledged what it was that you were going through. Think about how you feel about that person. There's that connection. And along with vulnerability, it's one of those things in which we struggle because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, vulnerability looks really good on you, but not so much on me. Like, we want to see vulnerability in other people, but it's really hard to give ourselves permission to do that as well. So if you can go back one slide, we're going to talk about the myths of vulnerability just really quick.
I'm sorry for the delay. Like, it's live on our screens and for our viewers, but I think as you're talking, I can't explain it, but we're on the myth of vulnerability now, and then I'm going to move ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so the myths of vulnerability. Vulnerability is weakness. I can opt out of vulnerability, meaning I don't have to be a part of it. Vulnerability is oversharing. Vulnerability is doing it alone. I can do it on my own. I don't need any help. And vulnerability, a myth of vulnerability is that we can engineer the uncertainty and discomfort out of vulnerability, meaning we can control everything so that we don't ever have to feel or appear vulnerable, and that trust becomes before vulnerability. And so the problem with these myths, again, is that it teaches us that being vulnerable is bad. Being vulnerable is weak. When the reality is think about people that have really shared something hard or difficult with you. I mean, most of the time, most of us don't look at them and think, oh, wow, that was really weak that you shared that really painful, hard thing. I mean, most of us, when we look at them and we see the courage that it took, we see strength, not weakness. And so when we're practicing vulnerability, one thing I will say is that it's really important to practice vulnerability with people that have earned the right to hear our stories. We don't want to just go around and be vulnerable to, the deli guy at HEB. We want to make sure that when we are sharing hard things, that we're sharing them with the people that have earned the right to hear them. So the next piece we're going to talk about is self-compassion. So this is based on the work of Dr. Krista Neff, and I want to describe it this way. So self-esteem, which we've all heard of, is this external concept. It's this thing that's sort of outside of ourselves. It's this idea that, if I come up to you and I say, hey man, you know what, you did such a good job on your presentation today. It was fantastic. It was awesome. My self-esteem would go up. I would feel pretty good about myself. if somebody came up to me and said, you know what, your presentation was horrible. It was so bad. I don't even know why they invited you to share. Then obviously my self-esteem is going to go down. So based on her work, you know, that seems pretty unfair. Why should how I value myself as a person be managed by something or that somebody else said to me that maybe saw me in one moment of time, you know, based on their perception? And so self-compassion is different in that self-compassion is internal. It is something that we can make a choice on. So self-compassion is talking to ourselves the way we would talk to someone we love. So I want everybody to just take a minute and think about their critic's voice, that voice inside of your head in which, you know, when you've screwed up or you've made a mistake or you don't feel like you're enough, those messages that come inside of your head, that voice that starts to kind of tell you these really hard, awful, mean things. So just take a minute and think about that. So I'm going to give an example, and I'll just use myself. So, you know, in my critic's voice, if I start to not practice self-compassion, you know, I can say things to myself like, oh man, you're so stupid. I can't believe you did that again. I mean, when are you going to get it right? Like, how many times does it take to learn something? Why can't you just be smarter? Why can't you just be better? Why can't you just, you know, look prettier? Why don't you, you know, look how everybody else has it together and you're just continually failing at something? So that would be my critic's voice. And I want you to now think about somebody in your life, and it can be more than one person, but just choose one for right now that you genuinely love. Like, you look at that person and you know they're imperfect. You know they struggle, you know they make mistakes, but you see their potential, you see how much they're trying, and you genuinely love that person. So take a minute and kind of identify that person. And I want you to think about now, imagine yourself looking at that person and saying all of those awful, mean things that you say to yourself. You know, so for me, if I identify, you know, my husband, Chris, you know, if I turn to him and I say, Chris, you know what, why can't you get it together? I mean, you're so stupid. Why can't you just, you know, learn? You know, everybody else has it together and you don't. You know, you're not good enough. You're not handsome enough. Like, I mean, why even bother? I mean, obviously, I would never, ever talk to my husband that way because, again, you know, I love him and it's not true. But yet we do that to ourselves all the time. And so if you don't remember anything else from this presentation, what I would really encourage you to start with is the practice of self-compassion. And I say practice because it's a skill. You know, it's a choice and it's a skill and it's something that we have to work on every day. I mean, I've been doing this work for a long time and I still practice self-compassion.
Okay, I'm on the courage slide now.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to do that in just a sec.
Thank you.
So the other parts of self-compassion is a common humanity, that our struggles are everyone's struggles, we're not alone, and then again, the mindfulness that we talked about earlier. And so the last tool that we need in times of crisis is courage. And this is based on the work of Dr. Brene Brown, and courage is a heart word. The root of the word courage is core, the Latin word for heart. In one of its earliest forms, the word courage had a very different definition than it does today. Courage originally meant to speak one's mind by telling all one's heart. We each have a story to tell. And when we take ownership of our story and we have the courage to say, look, this is who I am, this is my authentic self, and I have value and worth, then we can start to make the changes that we so desperately need. And the last slide is, only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. And again, I just hope that as we continue to move forward through COVID-19 and all the changes that are happening, that we are mindful of the light that exists within ourselves as well as within our communities, and that we practice vulnerability and mindfulness and self-compassion, and that we will have the courage to do so. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all. And I don't know if there's any questions or if we have time for that.
Let me see if anybody has any questions. You can type them in. There's a Q&A to the right on the screen of your, should be on the top of your desktop. I'm not sure what the viewers are seeing, but if there's any questions, you can type them in or send me an email and I'd be happy to send those over to Maren, or she can share her contact information if she'd like.
Yeah, so if they just want to send the questions to you and then you can forward them to me, that would be great. And
Okay.
any feedback that anyone has, I would love to hear it.
Someone said, thank you for this topic. It has been a tough time for a lot of people.
I appreciate everybody that joined us and for the opportunity.
And I want to thank NAMI Brazos Valley, National Alliance on Mental Illness of Brazos Valley, for sponsoring today. They service 7 counties in the Brazos Valley: Brazos, Burleson, Grimes, Leon, Madison, Robertson, and here in Washington County. So if you would like to speak with someone there, I have their contact information on our screen. They are a member of our Chamber of Commerce. So if you need to get in touch with someone there and want to contact us, if you can't find the information, to call them and we'll have someone get in touch with you. So thank you again, Maren. And
thank you.
And we're going to have this webinar published on our YouTube channel. For people who weren't able to join live today, they'll be able to go back and watch it recorded. So thank you, everybody. And yes, somebody's asking if they can have access to these slides outside of the webinar. And yes, we're going to publish. Will you allow us to send out your PDF, Maren, to people who request the slides only?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. I can let me send you an updated copy though.
Okay.
That you can put out. Yeah.
That sounds good. All right. Yes, we'll get those sent over to anybody who wants to request them. And you can email Shay at brenhamtexas.com. That's SHAE at brenhamtexas.com. And I can send that PDF to anybody who requests them. All right. I'm going to sign off for today. And thanks again to our sponsor and to Maren for her presentation.
Thank y'all.